We are up to chapter 6, Mishnah number 9. We are nearing the end of this wonderful book, The Ethics of the Fathers. And we have, for the first time in a while, a teaching with an author, a teaching that's attributed to an author. Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. Rabbi Yossi, son of Kisma, said, Pamachas, one time, I was traveling, I was walking on the road, and I encountered a person, and he said shalom, he greeted me, and I returned to him the greeting. So the great rabbi is recording for us in the Mishnah an event that happened. He was traveling, and he meets this person, the person greets him, says hi, and he responds and says hi in return. Amarli, the person said to me, Rabbi, my teacher, Me'eza makam ata, from which place are you? Where do you live? Where are you from? So I responded, Mi'ir Gedola, from a very large city of scholars and of sages and of scribes. That's where I come from. I come from a great city with lots of Torah scholars numbered amongst its residents. Amar Li, so this person said to me, Rebbe, my teacher, do you want to move in with us? Do you want to relocate to our city, to our place? Va'ani etain lecha, and I will give you elef alafim, 1,000 thousands, which is 1,000,000. I'll give you 1,000,000 dinare zav, dinars, which are coins of gold. Va'avanim tovos, and precious stones, margolios, and pearls. The rabbi is being given an offer. Come move into our city. It's not a city that's full, replete with Torah sages, but I'll give you an enormous signing bonus. 1,000 thousands, 1,000,000 gold coins and precious gems and pearls. Rabbis are not usually very highly paid, I've been told. This is a very exciting offer. So what does the rabbi respond? I said to him, if you give me all the silver and the gold and all the precious stones and all the pearls in the entire world, I will only live in a place of Torah. So the rabbi is given this king's ransom of an offer to go move into this city, to this other city, which we don't know anything about this other city. And the rabbi refuses. He rejects the offer, saying, if I had all the money in the world, not just 1,000, not just 1,000,000 gold coins and precious stones and pearls, if I had every single piece of valuable gold and silver and so on in the world, I will only choose to live in a place of Torah. And then he cites the book of Psalms, written by David, king of Israel, Tov li Torah spicha, it is preferable to me the Torah of your mouth, i.e. of God's mouth, me'alfe zahav v'chesef. I prefer that more than thousands of gold and silver. And then the great rabbi continues, v'lo od, and not only that, el b'shas p'tirasa shel adam, when a person dies, what accompanies them? What walks alongside them as they make their trip to the afterlife? Not the silver, not the gold, not the precious stones, not the pearls. They can no longer use that currency in the place where they are heading to. Ela Torah amasim tovim b'vad, the only thing that can help them, the only currency of value at that time, it's only Torah study and good deeds. That's it. Quotes a verse. When you are walking, it will accompany you. When you lie down, it will guard you. And when you awake, it is what you speak. Explains the Mishnah. What does this mean? Torah study will help you in this world. And when you lay down, i.e. in the grave, it will help you as well. It will guard you and protect you. And when you arise again in the world to come, that will be your tisichacha, your conversation. V'omer, and finally ends with a verse, Liya Kesef, V'liyazav, Ne'um, Hashem Tzvakos. To me belongs all the gold, and to me belongs all the silver, says Hashem, master of legions. Meaning that you're offering me gold and silver, but ultimately the gold and silver belongs to God. Whereas the Torah and the mitzvos that a person does belongs to them themselves, and thus it's not really an offer that I will entertain. So this is a fascinating story that the Mishnah tells us. It's a beautiful story. It's an intriguing story. This great rabbi, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, is recounting what happened. He was traveling, and he's being pitched to move to a city with a huge salary, and he refuses. Not because he doesn't want the money, because he only wants to live in a place of Torah, and that's preferable more than any amount of gold and silver. Now, again, as we mentioned, this is the first named Mishnah in a while. We had effectively the whole chapter 6, has been anonymous teachings, and we get this very interesting story with Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. He was a Tana, an author of the Mishnah, who lived in the 2nd century. So this is 50 years or so after the temple has been destroyed. It is rough times for the Jews in the land. They are subject to endless persecution at the hands of the Romans. And he's one of the greatest sages of his era, but he doesn't appear so many places in the Talmud and the Mishnah. In fact, he's not mentioned at all in the Mishnah. And you may ask the question, well, he's mentioned in this Mishnah. It's actually not technically a Mishnah. It is a Brisa, which is a Mishnahite era teaching that's not incorporated in the Mishnah, which is why the book of Pirkei Avos really has 5 chapters, not 6. We mentioned this in the past. It's called a Brisa, not a Mishnah. It's technical, inside baseball. You don't need to worry about that. He's not mentioned very frequently, but there are some very dramatic stories that are told about him in the Talmud. In one instance, he made a prediction, a chilling prediction, that proved to be true. There was a strident debate between 2 sages in the Talmud, featured in the Talmud, the book of Yevamos, page 96b. And they were arguing about a very particular type of bolt that has a thick knob at the end. And is that considered a vessel? And is that muksa on Shabbos or not? If something is a raw material, it's muksa. If it's not, if it's a finished vessel, it's not muksa, and so on. This is a big debate between 2 sages, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi. Not Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, a different Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi Haglili. And they were arguing. And they got very vociferous in their debate. And one thing led to another, that very tragically, a Torah scroll was torn. They were each trying to bring proofs, and there were books in front of them, and they started arguing and jostling. And one says, "Look what it says over here," and they unroll the scroll, and then the other person's like, "No, look what it says over here," and they roll the scroll in another direction, and a tear happened in the Torah scroll. And Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was there, and he witnessed this, and he says, if this place, this room, this academy was the location in which a Torah scroll was ripped, I will be shocked if this academy does not eventually turn into a house of idolatry, meaning this shul, or this beis medrash, this academy, this study hall will eventually be bereft of Jews, and the idolaters will make it a house of worship for idolatry. Vigorous debate, of course, is encouraged. If someone doesn't debate over Torah, well, that's not a sign of honor and respect. It's a sign of disrespect. If you don't care about it, if it's not important, it doesn't really matter if it's pure, impure, kosher, not kosher, who's right in a debate. If it doesn't matter, what difference is made? Let's agree to disagree. That means you're not according to a matter of Torah the requisite seriousness. If we're arguing about the will of God, you can't just allow someone to say something which is wrong. Debate is a sign of studying the Torah properly. But debate that has within it anger, that's tinged with anger, that's inappropriate. The Talmud tells us anger is the opposite of faith. And therefore, if someone gets angry, it's as if the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is away from them. If someone gets angry, it's a form of idolatry on some level. And therefore, we have a house of Torah scholarship. This is the most sacrosanct venue, once the temple's destroyed, of course, in the Jewish world. This is where the presence of God is felt most palpably. But there was anger. There was an outburst of anger. And an outburst of anger is, in effect, an outburst of idolatry. And Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, he observes this, and he makes a prediction, and unfortunately, it came true. One very interesting episode featuring Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma in the Talmud. There's a second interesting episode featured in the book of Sanhedrin, page 98a, going into 98b. The students were curious. When is Messiah coming? And they go up to Rabbi Ben Kisma and they say, would you kindly tell us when Messiah is coming? And the great rabbi says, listen, I'll tell you, but I'm worried that after I tell you, you will say, okay, bring us a sign, have some sort of divine recognition, with the divine, a miracle of sort, a wonder of sort, to prove that you're saying this correctly. I'll tell you when it's coming, provided you don't compel me to prove it with a sign. And the students say, no problem. Just tell us when it's coming. No need for a sign. So the great rabbi says, when the gates of Rome, when they fall, and they are rebuilt, and they fall a second time, and they are rebuilt, and they fall a third time, and they're not rebuilt, that's when Messiah is coming. And of course, the students were very intrigued by what he said, and they said, "Oh, Rabbi, just give us a sign. just give us a sign." So of course he was not so happy about that. He said, like, my whole condition for telling you Messiah is going to come is that you don't ask me for a sign. But anyway, he gave him a sign, and he says, when the waters, if what I'm saying is correct, let the waters of this cave, this Pamias cave, let it turn into blood, and indeed it turned into blood. A very dramatic teaching of, or a story of Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma as featured in the Talmud. Now, what does this mean? The gates of Rome will fall twice and will be rebuilt. But it's going to fall a third time and it won't be rebuilt, and that's when Messiah is coming. What does this actually mean? So, of course, the Talmud tells us many places, and the Kabbalists elaborated upon this, and this is one of the major themes that's strung throughout the Torah. And that is that the two brothers, Jacob and Esau, are opposites. When one is up, the other necessarily is down. And when the other one is down, the other one necessarily must be up. Jerusalem and Rome are opposites. It cannot be that they're both ascendant, and it cannot be that they're both at a nadir. When one is up, the other one necessarily is down. Jerusalem and Rome are opposites. And therefore, if there's a temple to God built in Jerusalem, it must be that the gates of Rome have fallen. It must be. Because when Jerusalem is ascendant, when Jacob is ascendant, then Rome must be falling. So when the gates of Rome are destroyed, it must be the temple's built. But if the gates of Rome have been rebuilt, it must be the temple's destroyed. And that happens once, and that happens twice. But if the temple is rebuilt a third time, it must be that that gate will fall a third time in Rome, and it will not be rebuilt, because the third temple will not be destroyed. The Roman gates fell twice. That's the first temple and the second temple. But Rome recovered, Esau recovered, and they rebuilt those gates, and thereby necessarily the first and second temple were destroyed. But the final fall of Esav, the final fall of Rome, well, that's the time of Messiah. That's the third temple, and that will not be destroyed, and thus those gates of Rome will not be rebuilt. That's kind of the deeper message of what he was telling his students. Now, parenthetically, the Midrash tells us that Esav had a double merit. And the reason why he was able to destroy two temples is because he had two merits. And that's because when he arrived at Isaac and he finally brought the game that he had trapped, and he's coming to get the blessing that he was promised, and he discovers that he was outsmarted and outfoxed by Jacob. Jacob preceded him, usurped the blessings, masqueraded as Esav, stole it, and bolted and left and fled and absconded. When he discovered that, he started crying. And the Talmud says, the Midrash actually, that one tear fell out, a second tear fell out, and a third tear was about to fall out, but it got trapped in his eyelashes. And that's the merit of Esav, because he was lamenting and mourning the blessing. Each tear that he cried, that he shed over that downfall, resulted in him being given merit, in Rome being given merit to destroy one temple. The third one didn't quite fall, and therefore the third temple cannot be destroyed. And the third time that the gates of Rome collapse, well, the temple will be rebuilt and it will not be destroyed, because the gates of Rome will not be rebuilt because Esav has exhausted all of his merits. That's a very dramatic story that the Talmud tells us about Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. And then there's a conclusion to the story. He tells his students at the time of his death, when you bury me, make sure you dig very, very deep. I don't want to be buried in a shallow grave. I want a deep grave. Why? Because in the end of days, in the apocalypse, in the wars of Gog and Magog, there's going to be a lot of defiling of graves. And there's not going to be a grave in the land of Israel that won't be exhumed and turned into a trough for the horses of the enemy. And I don't want my coffin to be used for that. And therefore, bury me very, very deep. So that way I am spared that indignity. Again, very dramatic stuff. And of course, we are trained to know that when the Talmud says something which is so dramatic, there's multiple layers and lots of depth. And we're just grappling and scratching the surface. And that's okay. One final story that reveals the kind of environment in which he lived. He lived in very difficult times. He lived in the times of the Hadrianic persecution, when the Emperor Hadrian banned the public teaching of Torah on pain of death. And many great rabbis were assassinated. And he was visited by Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, who was the father-in-law of Rabbi Meir, the primary author of the Mishnah. The Talmud says a story. Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion was teaching Torah publicly, and Rabbi ben Kisma said that's not a good idea because now the Romans are going to kill you for it. And there's another side point to the story where they have a conversation as to who becomes eligible for the afterlife and who does not become eligible for the afterlife, and so on. But the epilogue of the story is Rabbi Yossi died, and Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion indeed was teaching Torah publicly, and the Romans caught him and killed him in a very brutal, macabre, and grisly fashion. They took the Torah scroll that he was teaching from, and they wrapped him with it, and they took some wool, which they chilled and placed upon his heart, and positioned a fire just a little bit far away from him so he could roast to death but not die too fast. In a very brutal and violent and evil way, this great sage died. And that, of course, reveals to us just the trying times in which Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma lived and the circumstances of his passing. But here he gives us a story that's preserved for posterity about when he met this person and the person tried to coax him to move, to relocate, and he refused, opting to stay with the sages, even if it means foregoing the million gold coins and precious stones. Now, the commentaries, they hone in on the details of this story. Of course, we know if it's in the Mishnah, if it's in the Talmud, there's not going to be any extraneous details. There's no filler information. Nothing's random. And the authors of the Mishnah are not getting paid by the words. They don't just add words that are not necessary. And any part of the story that can be removed and is not removed must contain some insight. So, for example, the story starts off. There was once I was traveling on the road. This happened once. He could have said, I met a person. Why does he have to introduce it with the preamble, I was once traveling and I met a person? So the commentaries deduce from this, Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma was a consummate sage. And he's saying, this happened once. There was one time that I left the academy. And this very dramatic story and this proposal, and he's being tempted, he wants him to move to the city, he's being poached by this other city. This happened in the sole time that the great rabbi left the academy. He left the academy exactly once. And this is what happened. He was given this Godfather offer, this king's ransom. And I think it's noteworthy just to focus on this, that in the times of the Talmud and of the Mishnah, they had completely different standards of diligence. The idea of someone leaving the academy once, it's completely foreign to us. But we know, you read the stories, Rabbi Akiva, he spent 24 years straight in the academy. We read about in the Torah, Jacob, he literally did not leave the academy for 14 years. And when he finally leaves and he stops at Mount Moriah and he lays down and he has the dream with the ladder and the angels ascending and descending, and he goes to sleep over there, Rashi tells us he goes to sleep over there to the exclusion of elsewhere. For 14 years in the academy, what's he doing? He's not sleeping. He's studying. And if he's dozing off, he's dozing off. But he's spending 14 years straight in the academy. My grandfather, blessed memory, used to talk about one of his mentors. His name was Rabbi Eliyahu Dushnitzer. He says, I saw him. He would go home for Shabbos to his family. And after Shabbos, he would go to the academy. And he would stay there the whole week. And if he was tired, he would just doze off while studying. But he stayed there literally the entire week. And he came back for Shabbos. This is someone who lived in modern times. The degree to which the great sages were obsessed with Torah study and the diligence that they had, it's not something that we really are familiar with in modern times. When they go to Vilna, for example, he would only sleep for 2 hours a day. But it really wasn't 2 hours a day. It was an hour and 56 minutes because it was 4 stints of 29 minutes. every day for his whole life. Why? Not because he doesn't like sleeping so much, it's because he doesn't want to leave this environment of Torah study that he was completely immersed in. When Rambam talks to aspiring Torah sages, he says, if you want to do this, if you want to be crowned with the crown of Torah, you cannot allow a single night to go without Torah study. But what if it's the Super Bowl? Well, now it's election season. What if it's a debate? Gotta watch my debate party. What if it's election night itself? And the returns are coming in from the swing states. What if it's the Game 7 of the World Series? What if my favorite superhero movie is now being released? Or the new iPhone, remember that? It used to be the new iPhone was all exciting. Everyone would wait there 3 days ahead of time, sitting there, waiting for the new iPhone. There's a standard of diligence that we're not at all familiar with that was, and still is really, the lot of the great sages. This great rabbi, we're told, it happened once that he left the academy. And the one time he leaves, he meets a character who is unnamed. And this person, or this entity, is trying to lure him away. What the commentaries observe from this, that when a person's in the academy, they are granted a certain degree of protection. It's a spiritual Kevlar. Once you leave, once you walk out, you're right away going to be tempted with all sorts of very tantalizing offers to go depart, leave the academy forever. And the commentaries, again, read very carefully into the words of the Mishnah. Upaga bi. This person encountered me. I didn't encounter them. They encountered me. Okay, you have to read it very carefully to notice that. But there's significance to that observation. This person is departing the academy. And he's encountering something, but he's not encountering it. That thing is encountering him. The commentaries cite the Talmud. The Talmud says if you are ascending, you are seeking purity, you're going to be aided from above. But the opposite is also true. If you are departing from the academy, if you are seeking impurity on some level, well, then you're also going to be availed your wishes from on high, from above. This person, great sage, never left the academy, left it once, right away is attacked by this force that's trying to destabilize his ironclad commitment to Torah study. He's being tempted to stray from the study hall. And what does the person or thing or force tempt the great rabbi with? Elef alafim, 1,000 thousands. 1,000,000 gold coins. Gold's trading at what, $2,500 an ounce? That's a lot of money. Now, this person is a great sage. Yes, he's leaving the academy, but still he's a great sage. What's the temptation here? Well, the temptation is, think about if you had all that gold and all those assets. Think about how much charity you could do, how much kindness you could do. You could open up food and shelters and make sure that everyone has what they need. You could become an empire of kindness and charity. And the rabbi responds, if you give me all the money, all the gold, all the silver in the world, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to abandon the place of Torah. Well, if I have all the money in the world, literally everyone else is broke. And therefore, you're giving me the opportunity to not just be someone who's very wealthy, can help a lot of people, but to have all the wealth and to help everyone. I could be like Joseph, universal provider. Still, it's better for me to live in a city of Torah. It is absolutely paramount. It's absolutely imperative if you are seeking to ascend in your spiritual agenda, to live in the best environment that's conducive for that. If you want to grow in your relationship with Hashem, you want to grow as a person, you want to develop yourself, the thing that matters almost more than anything else is where you are, what environment you're living in, what atmosphere you're in. If you're in a place of Torah, that is an incredible leg up, and you shouldn't trade that for even the opportunity to be the greatest charitable, kind-hearted person in the world. Almost nothing matters as much as that. To be in an environment with other great sages, with other great academies, an environment that is pulsating with Torah, that is more valuable than anything else. There were many, many great sages who moved from Europe to the United States in the first part of the 20th century. Most of them, even though they were great sages, absolute giant sages, most of them failed at perpetuating their love of Torah, their commitment to Torah and to mitzvos. They failed at perpetuating that to their children because they came to an environment that doesn't have Torah in it. Now that's changed, thankfully, over the decades. But if you are impoverished, but you're in Lithuania in the 1910s or 20s, and you can come to America and they'll give you a fat salary, you'll be the rabbi of the city, but everyone else is ignorant. That's exactly what he was being offered over here. And again, very few succeeded, very few who moved over succeeded in ensuring that their Torah commitment will not slip away. To leave a place of Torah, it can prove fatal for a person's spiritual life. Exhibit A of that is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. If that name sounds familiar, we've had it earlier in our book, chapter 2 of Pirkei Avos. We studied it, in 2018, a long time ago. It tells of a Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the greatest sage at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. And he had 5 primary students, and the greatest of them all was Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. The great rabbi said, if I have all my students and all the sages of Israel on one side of a scale, and the other side of the scale I place just Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, he will outweigh them all, on a spiritual level meaning. And he was someone who had otherworldly scholarship. The Talmud recounts that he was traveling with his teacher, with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and they started studying the most esoteric and arcane subjects of the Kabbalistic nature. They were discussing Ma'aseh Merkava, which is the chariot of God as described in Ezekiel chapter 1. And when they were studying it, a fire descended from heaven that surrounded them. It was a very dramatic experience of Torah study. And Rabbi Yochanan was so moved by his student, he kissed him and he said, "Blessed are you, Hashem. You have given to Abraham a descendant like this. Fortunate are you, Abraham, that you have a descendant like Elazar ben Arach." But then the temple was destroyed, and all the sages were forced to move, forced to relocate. And the sages, as one, opted to move to one city called Yavne. That's where the sages were. Whereas this other sage, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, he made the poor decision to go to a different city. And he had hoped that maybe his colleagues would accompany him. But no, he remained in a city that doesn't have Torah, whereas they remained in a city that did have Torah. And then he came to rejoin them, and he had forgotten all his Torah. And he even forgot how to read. This great sage, the one sage that outweighed all the other sages, had forgotten how to read. Instead of saying, HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, he said, Cheresh Haya Libam. He conflated some of the letters. And the sages were devastated at this terrible degradation. And they prayed. And eventually, Elijah, prophet, came and retaught Rabbi Elazar ben Arach all of the Torah that he had lost. Choosing where you live is very important. And the primary variable for someone who wants to advance in their spiritual agenda, who wants to tend to their soul, not just to their body, what kind of people, what kind of environment, what kind of atmosphere? Is this a place of Torah? If so, I should be willing to forfeit some of the creature comforts that come with living elsewhere. But you may argue, well, the great sage is being offered all the money in the world. So yes, you'll lose some Torah, but look at what you'll gain. You'll have all those merits of all those mitzvos. This is settled. This debate is settled. What is preferable? What is more important? If you could choose one, which one would you choose? Torah study or acts of kindness and charity? Which one is greater? The Talmud addresses this. In the book of Kiddushin on page 40b, there was a debate, a very famous debate between the various sages. And one opinion said, well, good deeds are more important. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, no, Talmud is greater. Talmud Gadol, Talmud is preferable than good deeds. Why? Shahat Talmud, maybe l'dei ma'aseh. Talmud, the study of Torah, that is more important than action, because it will incorporate action as well. And therefore, if you have to forfeit Torah study for the opportunity to do more mitzvos and more kindness and more charity, the correct approach is to choose more Torah study. Now, the rabbi refuses the offer, but then he has this tangential point at the funeral. What's going to accompany you? Not your gold, not your silver, only your Torah study and your good deeds. The rabbi is being tempted here. He's being tempted. You imagine he wasn't independently wealthy. He wasn't a trust fund rabbi. I imagine, knowing what we know about that time, he was destitute. And he's been offered a path of an easy life, stability, economic flexibility, and freedom. And he's been tempted by it. Give a little bit of your Torah. You can still study a lot of Torah. Come on. You still study a lot. Won't be quite the same, but isn't that something that you could maybe forfeit a little bit? And you'll be able to do so much more kindness. 1,000 thousands. 1,000,000 gold coins. This is a temptation. This is what we call the Yetzer Hara tempting the great rabbi. And what does he invoke? He invokes his funeral. If a person wants to really fight the Yetzer Hara, there are some very powerful tools at his disposal, his or her disposal. And the most potent of those tools is to remember your day of death. If you remember your day of death, that's the most powerful and effective way to overcome the Yetzer Hara. And it's foolproof. The only power the Yetzer Hara has is if a person forgets that their time here is temporary. If a person remembers their day of death, and not just remembers their death, visualizes it, your funeral, that's not a pleasant thing to think about. But it may be a very beneficial thing to think about. If you could visualize that, and your body's completely impotent, and it's completely inoperable, and you're being brought in a coffin to be interred in the ground. Suddenly all that money and all that gold and all that silver, it doesn't really capture your imagination the way it did previously. So the great rabbi is invoking his funeral. What's valuable for me then? Torah, the mitzvos. That's what matters, not the gold and not the silver. And that aids him in his effort to try to resist what he knows is a temptation. But wait a minute. I thought he was offering him the money so he can use it for the merit. When you remember your day of death, the money becomes completely meaningless. And sometimes a person may be tempted to say, well, I'll use all the gold and silver for the merits. I'll be the one who uses my money, not for any nefarious causes. I'll do it only for mitzvah, completely, 100%. I'll live the same destitute life, the same life of eschewing any sort of physical pleasure, the same life of privation. And I'll just use my finances to help others. A useful way to really evaluate why you're motivated to get all that gold and silver. Is it the gold and the silver and the prestige? Or is it the merits? Think about how you feel about the day of death. Think about when you're actually able to separate the two. When gold and silver does not accompany you, and the merits and Torah study does. The merits, they accompany you forever. The gold won't last. And therefore, knowing that, the great rabbi says, I am going to stay in the city of sages. And he brings a very powerful verse to support this. Tovli Torah's picha. It is preferable to me, the Torah of your mouth, i.e. of God's mouth, more than thousands of gold and silver. When we study Torah, we must remember this is the Torah coming from God's mouth, so to speak. And the commentaries tell us, when I'm studying Torah, I am studying the Almighty's Torah. And it's as if it's coming from the mouth of God. It's as if the Sinai revelation is happening right now. And I'm studying Torah, and God is saying it to me, so to speak. I'm getting it directly from the mouth of God. If a person thinks about that, that recasts for them the value of Torah. It's not just the word of God that we got in the past. It's the word of God that I'm getting right now. If you think about that, that's a great way to reevaluate how important, how central Torah should be in your life. You want to develop a love of Torah that's able to overshadow some of your more base desires that we all have, some of the temptations of the Yetzer Hara that he's trying to make us allured by. You realize that the Torah study, it's from the mouth of God directly. It's like a sign of revelation. Every time you open the book, it's a new sign of revelation. That's a very powerful experience, and that's a complete reframing of what Torah study is, and that too will aid you in realizing that you should not be forfeiting even a little bit. The Torah is with you in your lifetime, and with the funeral, the money's gone, but Torah is still there. In the grave, it's with you, and even once you are reborn in the afterlife, in the resurrection, the money is long, long gone, but the Torah endures forever. And he ends with a final crescendo. Li ha-kesef v'li ha-zav. God says, the money and the silver, it's actually mine. Even when you have it, it's mine. It's mine. It's ultimately owned by God. But when we study Torah, it's actually ours. The study of Torah is a transformation of Torah from being God's Torah to being my Torah. And that's why, like we mentioned in the past, if a Torah scholar wants to forego his honor, he may do so. Why? Because it's not the honor of God's Torah, it's their Torah. because they've acquired it via its study. So would you rather own Torah or pretend to own the money, but really it's God's? And when you're gone, you don't even have the ability to pretend that it's yours. Half it's taken by the IRS, and the other half your kids will fight over and disperse amongst them, hopefully, without causing too much animosity and discord. This is a very powerful story, very interesting story. Lots of incredible nuggets that we can pick up. Fascinating character, Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, and he has this departure from the academy once, and he has this incredible experience, and he shows us, and he records for us, and he transmits to us, and he canonizes for us how he processed this offer, this Godfather offer, and how he managed to make the correct decision. And that could be very useful for us to think about and to consider. We all have to make decisions. We have to make trade-offs. You can't have it all, or at least there will be times we have to make a choice. And when you make the choice, it should be the correct one, the one that will endure for you forever. We're not the kind of people that eschew all physical things. We don't believe in living in a cave and being an ascetic and living a monastic life. That's not our way. It's not our way. But if you have to make a trade-off, you make a choice between Torah and anything else, of course, the correct decision, as Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, as he demonstrates for us, choose the thing that will accompany you even once you're dead, even in the grave, and even in the afterlife. And by the way, the money that you have, it's not really yours. Liya Kesef, V'liyazav, it belongs to God. I thank you for listening. We're approaching the end of the book. Very exciting. I believe we have, I think, 3 more teachings. That's it. We started this in 2017. We're nearing the end. Hope to finish it very soon. Very excited to do that with y'all. And of course, for questions, comments, and feedback, my email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.